Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Just going to give a couple of minutes for folks to trickle in. We'll get started shortly. Please hang on. Thanks. For those of you that have just joined, we're giving a few minutes for folks to keep joining, but we'll get started in about 30 seconds or so. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Axel Pearson. Welcome to the DLC Horticultural Lighting webinar on draft 1 of the version 2.1 technical requirements. Hope everyone is having a good fall and have not eaten all of their Halloween candy yet. Personally, I had to buy another bag this weekend because we already went through one, so pace yourselves. So we're very excited to continue version 2 with this update, which adds eligibility for new types of products recently released version 2.0 technical requirements. And we presented that last month. I hope some of you attended that, and if you did, welcome back. So thank you for joining today. And also, as always, a sincere thank you to all of you that participate in and provide comments, especially on version 2.0. As you know, stakeholder input is such a key part of our DLC process. So thank you for your time and expertise, and I hope to get a little bit more of your time and expertise on version 2.1. So today we're going to talk through the proposed requirements and then take some time to answer questions at the end. Okay. Go through a bit of the agenda first. So we'll start out with quick introductions to the team on the webinar today and cover some brief webinar logistics. I'll go into an overview of the requirements and timeline. From there, we'll move into revisions to the horticultural technical requirements, again, which add eligibility for DC power, externally supplied active cooled luminaires, and also LED replacement lamps. And then finally, we'll have 15 minutes or so at the end for questions and answers. I'd like to introduce you to the team we have on the webinar with us. My name is Axel Pearson. I'm a technical product manager here at DLC. I'll present a few slides and I'll also facilitate the question and answer session at the end of the call. Casey Holland, the technical manager for DLC's horticultural lighting program, will cover a good chunk of the technical requirements, and he's probably going to be the one answering a lot of the questions at the end of the call as well. Additionally, we have Aaron Feldman, DLC's Senior Technical Operations Analyst, and Greg Barker from Energy Solutions, who provided us with some technical support on this version. They are both covering the questions pane for the duration of the webinar. So you may not hear their voice, but if you enter a question into the questions pane, they will be the ones answering on the other end. This way you can put a face to the name that you'll be interacting with through GoToWebinar. So more about Q&A in a moment. First, some logistics. So slides and the recorded webinar will be posted on the DLC news and events page on our website after the webinar. All attendees are automatically muted, so please use the chat feature within GoToWebinar, and if you have an issue, someone from our team will help you. Okay, like I said, we have left about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for the Q&A session. Please use the question pane in the GoToWebinar interface to submit questions. You don't have to hold your questions until the end. Just enter them as they come up, and Aaron and Greg will try their best to answer as they come in. You may get an answer right away, but if you don't, then we'll make sure to follow up with you after the webinar via email. So we'll be tracking all the questions that come in, and for those that we think will benefit the whole group to hear, I will read them aloud and our team will answer for the whole group, and you can continue to enter questions at that time as well. I'll also note that questions outside of the scope of version 2.1, we'll take those in and we'll answer them via email, but we won't answer those aloud. So you're welcome to answer or ask questions, but try to keep them relevant to what we're presenting on today. Okay. So finally, while we will answer questions throughout the webinar, we would prefer that you submit any comments using the comment form. And so this really allows us to better track and catalog your comments. So please download the comment form from our website, fill it out with as much information as is relevant, and then you can send them to comments@designlights.org. There are key questions for each topic in the draft that we have called out specifically for your input. So we won't cover those questions on the call today, but please be aware that they're in there and we would love your input. So again, submitting comment forms will ensure that your input and feedback is considered to the best of our ability. I hope that makes sense. All right, with all of that out of the way, we will move on to a bit more of the content. So for some context, there are two parts to version 2. There's 2.0 we released last month and 2.1, and that's the focus of today's webinar. Specifically, this is draft 1, and so we'll go through the timeline of our draft development process in a few slides. So here's a quick summary of what we're covering on version 2.1 today. It's important to note that 2.1 builds upon version 2.0. We are just adding eligibility for new types of products, DC powered and modular systems, products with externally supplied active cooling capabilities, and a couple types of LED replacement lamp products. So the overall requirements of 2.0 will not be impacted by these eligibility additions with 2.1. There's no delisting impacts from version 2.1. We're just really adding some new categories that will be able to be listed. And finally, draft 1, what we're covering today, just covers the technical proposals. I imagine you'll have some implementation questions about how to submit an application or how to test. Those implementation details will be described a little more in draft 2, certainly in the final, and definitely in the manufacturer guidance documents that we'll release closer to the effective date. So we're really focusing just on the proposed technical requirements today. Okay, so again, because version 2.1 adds eligibility to the existing requirements, we've just added language into the existing policy document of version 2.0, which you probably have seen up to this point. And we've just highlighted it for easy review. You don't have to look at the whole document. Just scroll down. You can see it's around line 390 that it starts, and there's new language there. It doesn't impact the rest of the document. So each of these sections, there's 3 for the 3 types of products that we're considering as special considerations sections, and each are structured similarly. So each has an eligibility, technical requirements, QPL listing, and then key questions. So after today's webinar, please download the new version, take a look at that highlighted language. I imagine you'll have to refer back to the table 1 that has all the overall requirements, but we'll get into some more detail on that shortly. Okay. So a reminder about timeline. We've showed this slide a few times in recent past, but it's always good to cover it again. So here's version 2.0, right? So we re-released the final version in September, and it's effective in March. Here we are with version 2.1 at the bottom of your screen. So here we are in October. Draft 1 is now released and we're covering it in this webinar. And we're in a 6-week comment period now, which where we'll accept your input and comments throughout the comment period. We'll be looking to release draft 2 in March, have another comment period, and then release for final in June, and it will be effective in July. Okay. Now I'm going to hand it off to Casey, and he's going to talk through the technical requirements for DC power and externally supplied actively cooled luminaires. Casey, let me know when you want next slide.
All right, thanks Axel, and hi everyone. Thank you all for joining. Just to give a little bit more background and to add on to what Axel was saying, we're proposing the pathways in version 2.1 basically in response to DLC member and stakeholder input, and to just enable, more product categories to be listed to the Hort QPL in general. So with that, let's go ahead and move on and talk about DC powered fixtures. We can change to the next slide. Thank you, Axel. So as you can see here, and as you can see in the version 2.1 draft 1, we've proposed that DC powered fixtures essentially relate to how we're considering 2 different fixture types. One of them being like a modular fixture, where you have one AC to DC power source that's powering up multiple fixtures. Can have a minimum or maximum number of fixtures that it might serve, or might be attached to one of the fixtures or located remotely from the fixtures. And it is available to purchase through the fixture manufacturer for that specific model or the family of fixtures itself. And then the second type is being that it's just a DC powered fixture without an AC to DC power source. May or may not be sold with the fixture, generally not. But it is just a DC powered source. So fixtures may be wired to an AC to DC power source outside the fixture or in a separate room. It could also be, off the grid and connected to something like a solar powered microgrid or something. And are DC only or are for DC only horticultural facilities potentially. All right, and we can move to the next slide. So adding on to that, those 2 types are generally eligible and have to meet all the version 2.0 horticultural lighting technical requirements. So this is, all the requirements we have for things like photosynthetic photon efficacy, PPE, lifetime requirements on things like the LEDs and etc. within it, go through all the normal ISTMT testing for component lifetime meeting through 90, have the warranty, all that good stuff. And then in addition to that, we're requiring 2 reports in place of AC LM79 testing. The first one here is our DC powered all-on photon flux test report. So this is just a DC powered LM79 report where you've got to report all the normal good stuff. Specifically, the DC voltage, current, and power need to be noted from that testing, and that's really the biggest difference from the AC LM79 report. And then additionally to that, and specifically, if there are cabling options allowed for these products, the LM79 DC powered report here and test must be conducted on the fixture while using the longest cabling option allowed. And the measurements would need to be made at the cabling input from the power supply and not the output to the fixture, so that the losses over the length of the cable are also included, helping us better capture worst case PPE, similar to how we do for AC products. And you can move on to the next slide, Axel. All right, and then additionally, we've got a tested power source report that we're proposing to require, and this is essentially just to help us understand and relay the performance information around the efficiency profile for the power source, if there is one or multiple that are sold with the fixture, and a power source spec sheet or other documentation from the power source manufacturer with these numbers listed out for each load point that's described, and that'll be a little bit more detail on that on the next slide. And that may satisfy this in place of testing. It could also come from, benchtop testing or in-house, as we described it, where it doesn't need to come from an appropriately accredited third-party test lab. And you can use your own equipment to kind of help us understand this efficiency profile for the power source. And all values must be provided at the minimum and maximum AC input voltages for each of these drivers or power sources, as well as at the DC output voltage utilized by the DC module or DC fixture itself, if there's multiple. All right, now here is a little bit more detail about that tested power source report that's being proposed in 2.1. So for both types of those DC powered fixtures, modular being the one power source to many fixtures, or just a DC fixture itself without any power source, would both need to have this power source report that describes at 4 load points for the driver or power source, the set of electrical performance characteristics related and shown in this table here. So at the maximum rated power input, 50% of the maximum rated power input, 20% of the maximum, and the minimum power as specified by the luminaire manufacturer would need to have measurements for the consumed input power, the DC output power, the electrical efficiency, power factor, and total harmonic distortion currents. And on the next slide is an example of what this report could look like. And this is also included in the draft. So as you can see here, manufacturer ABC Corp has some product that they're looking to qualify, and the power source can operate at 120 to 277 volts with some specified output power range. And all of the input power, tested output power, efficiency, power factor, and THD are all listed out across the loading percentages. And these tested efficiencies, which is showing up in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th column in this graph here, would help inform D-rated values, which we're calling D-rated AC or D-rated DC, PPE, PPF, and wattage, and all this good stuff. Also described on the next slide, but we'll essentially be using these efficiency as a coefficient to derate the DC LM79 test report measurements. So we'll have the input power be derated by the least efficient setting as a coefficient on here. So for example, looking at this table, you can see that the minimum percentage on the 277 volt is listed at 82.87. So we would essentially use a 0.8287 coefficient to derate your DC LM79 report performance for input power and PPE, and show that information on the QPL to help someone who uses the QPL have a better understanding of what is potentially the worst case efficacy that they might see if they're really using a low load on these power sources, which is generally not the case. And if you switch over to the next slide, Axel, you can visualize what I'm talking about a little bit better. So all of the new QPL fields that are going to be reported are shown here. There's going to be a system type, which will help distinguish the AC from the DC products and other products that are proposed in 2.1 and will be described on the next few slides. Also DC input voltage and input current coming from the LM79 test report. Also DC input power, DC PPE, and these values will be displayed also from that LM79 report. And then if you're using the photon efficacy P-bar, which is the 200 to 280 to 800 nanometer range instead of 400 to 700 nanometer range, then that'll be reported for DC also. And then, like I was saying, the D-rated input power and D-rated PPE will also be displaying on the QPL, and for the additional and optional P-bar metrics, if those are used. And then AC input power and AC PPE will not be populated as these are not part of the measurements, so it can't be. And then also, like I mentioned, THD and power factor will be shown in the existing fields with no difference from the AC systems or products. And next slide, please, Axel. And then lastly here, we've got a little call out to our comments form where we've asked a set of key questions, and the key questions are also in the draft one relating to the proposed methodology for listing D-rated values, or what to do for derating values if there's no power source and things like that. Asking about availability of power source performance data, either from the power source manufacturer, how to include things like cabling length if there's no maximum cable length being specified, and a whole lot of other stuff. And also, we don't have all the questions in here, and if you've got questions or feedback, make sure you let us know through our comments form, or through speaking up or typing in a message today. So look forward to hearing from you, and we can move on to the next set, which is liquid cooled or externally supplied actively cooled fixtures. And we can move on to the next one here. So this one, again, some eligibility clarifications up front. So LED horticultural fixtures that employ externally supplied circulating liquid to actively cool are eligible. And we define externally supplied circulating liquid cooled products to be products in which there's a liquid, often water or some kind of solution mixed between water and glycol, where it flows into the fixture and out from the fixture through specified ports in the system and is being channeled through some cooling plate or some other type of heat exchanger that's within the fixture. And then to clarify, externally supplied ducted forced air products that are being employed to actively cool are not eligible at this time. We're still investigating this product category, and we'll plan to include it in a revision in the future as the market demands for it. And just to follow up, the same for DC products, externally supplied actively cooled fixtures will need to meet all version 2.0 horticultural lighting technical requirements in addition to the special considerations being proposed in version 2.1. All right, so to get into the weeds of this, manufacturers of these products must specify, or we're proposing that manufacturers must specify the range of allowable operating conditions that should be supplied to or could be supplied to and affect the LED product performance, including things like the solution type and concentration, the flow rate of the coolant, the inlet fluid temperature, and all of these align with and hopefully will be supported by an ASABI standard in the future once it comes. Additionally, the threshold qualifying state that needs to be tested must be the manufacturer designs or designated state with the worst case operating temperatures for the cooling system, including the inlet fluid temperature, flow rate, and solution concentration. Since stabilization is a priority and a requirement for LM79 testing, multiple points will be measured and reported. So we'll be reporting information on the average and highest inlet fluid temperature measured at the manufacturer specified location, the TML. And this must be measured and reported during ISTMT and LM79 testing. Additionally, ISTMT test reports must report the operating temperature or temperatures at the fixture's highest rated ambient temperature, consistent with every other type of product that we're listing to the QPL under 2.0. And also, inlet fluid temperature must also be measured and reported during the benchtop or in-house electrical testing for the cooling system. All right, then we can move on to the next slide. So kind of building on that to making this product category eligible, we are opening up our specific requirements and not just pointing to the standard of LM79, but saying that we will be accepting LM79 test reports for these products that use gonioradiometer testing with methods or equipment from other than gonioradiometer types, not only type C, which is required in LM79. So all externally supplied circulating liquid-cooled horticultural fixtures seeking qualification to the DLC Hort QPL must test the fixture per IES ANSI LM79 while employing active cooling, and opening up this from exclusively type C to other than type C in addition to type C is really just intended to help ease the testing burden on these and support testing of these product types more easily. But we're definitely looking for your input on that because we are kind of stepping aside from LM79 on this. Also, electrical testing must be provided on the cooling system. So this is going to be things that document the maximum input power and input voltage to the cooling system when operating at its highest voltage in an all-on state. So all-on referring to the fixtures that they're cooling, they must be kind of doing a max flow to cool, running at the highest fluid temperature, etc., to capture this worst case, which is the general DLC approach to make sure that utilities and other members of the stakeholders of the Hort QPL and all of our QPLs can understand what's potentially the worst case product that they might be getting if they're working with these guys. Also, in-house and benchtop electrical, in-house or benchtop electrical testing is sufficient for this. So it doesn't need to come from an appropriately accredited test lab for the cooling system electrical testing. And then additionally, applicants must provide documentation describing the externally supplied cooling mechanism with the following reporting and threshold requirements. So the rated lifetime of the cooling system must be a minimum of 10 years as proposed in version 2.1 and as stated on the cooling mechanism manufacturer's spec sheet. So if there's multiple things, those things would all need to be rated for a minimum of 10 years as proposed in 2.1. And then also the range of acceptable inlet and outlet fluid temperature, flow rate, and solution type or concentration must also be ID'd and will be reported on the QPL. All right, next slide, please, Axel. So kind of summing up all the things that we were just talking about. So in addition to existing fields and new fields being proposed with, or that will be included once 2.0 is effective in March 2021, these externally supplied actively cooled fixtures are going to have the additional information listed on the Hort QPL. So first, the product type, same as DC and AC, now will all be clarified so that you know what type of product you're looking at, or you know, how it generally operates. And then from the ISTMT and LM79 test reports, the maximum and average tested inlet fluid temperature during stabilization will be reported on the QPL. And then also the allowable operating conditions supplied to the fixture will be listed on the QPL, and these include the solution concentration, the flow rate range, and the inlet fluid temperature range, all to help you understand, you know, what type of cooling needs to be going on to help these products, or to make sure that these products are operating as they should be. And then from the cooling mechanism in-house or benchtop electrical test, oops, that's a typo in there. The maximum input voltage, maximum input power, power factor, and THD will all be listed on the Hort QPL as proposed under version 2.1. All right, next slide, Axel. And then here, same as we had for DC and for lamps and for all of our policy revisions as we release them, we have key questions and we like to get your input on them. So as you can see here, or maybe you can't see here because the text is a little small, we have a few key questions around what to do with power consumption from the cooling system, because as currently proposed, this is kind of a crucial part to the system and relates to, you know, important factors like meeting LED lifetime requirements, but the power consumed by the cooling system isn't currently being considered. So if you think it should be and have some advice on how it should be, or if you think it shouldn't be and think it's great, let us know your feedback either way on these kind of things. Also, some specific questions around the rated requirements or rated lifetime requirements for the cooling system and the reasonability of those. Looking for input on all of this. And if there's other things that aren't asked here and you've got feedback on, definitely let us know and we'll be happy to get back to you and have a conversation about it. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Casey. That was a lot of talking, so I'll give you a break and I will cover the LED replacement lamps. So we are proposing eligibility for two categories of replacement lamps, pin-based fluorescent lamps and mogul-based HID replacement lamps. So I'll talk through these each separately over the next couple of slides, but there are some handy pictures if you're unfamiliar with these product categories. Okay, first up, I'll talk through the pin-based fluorescent replacement lamps. First, I should say that these products go by a few different names. The one that's written at the top, the pin-based fluorescent replacement lamps, also known as linear replacement lamps or LED tubes or TLEDs, which I will call them today just because it's short and easy. But what we mean here are LED lamps that are intended to replace fluorescent T8 and T5 lamps that have a G13 and a G5 base, respectively. And to be consistent with our solid state lighting program, that is our human-based lighting products where linear replacement lamps or TLEDs are eligible, these Hort-specific products must meet the definitions, the eligibility requirements, the supporting documentation, and the distribution requirements. You can see that in the lower right there. I'll talk about that in a minute. These Hort products must meet those aspects of the SSL version 5.1 requirements for TLEDs. So I'm not going to go into that policy today. That's been around for some time. I encourage you to review it if you're not familiar with it. So while the Hort lamps must meet those existing requirements, because these products are not intended for human lighting, the horticultural TLEDs don't need to meet luminous efficacy or the light output requirements of the solid state lighting program. We are just considered with the horticultural metrics for these products that are intended for horticultural applications. But you can imagine the form factor is similar. So the Hort TLEDs will need to meet all version 2.0 requirements of the horticultural lighting program. So this is similar to what we just learned in the last two product categories, that these are just special considerations for adding these products as eligible, but they still need to meet all the requirements of the existing program. But what must be tested here is the bare lamp, in which we at the DLC define as the lamp and the ballast system, if it uses a ballast, operated outside of the Luminera retrofit kit. So by testing just the lamp and ballast, these products must meet the version 2.0 technical requirements. That includes the photosynthetic photon efficacy, or a PPE of 1.9 micromoles per joule, report photon flux, far red photon flux, etc. So all of those existing requirements apply. So, and finally, as is written in the SSL technical requirements, the linear replacement lamps, the TLEDs and Hort, must have a beam angle of greater than or equal to 140 degrees. And again, this is consistent with those existing requirements. Next up, we have the mogul base lamps, and similar to the previous product category, these go by a few names as well. HID replacement lamps, corn cobs, or MOG LEDs, which I'm going to call them today because again, it's short and easy. It's the mogul base and LED squished together, so I'm going to call them MOG LEDs. But what we mean here are the LED lamps that are intended to replace single-ended high-intensity discharge lamps that have an E39 or E40 base. With this version of the horticultural technical requirements, we are proposing that only UL Type B lamps meaning those that bypass the ballast are eligible for listing at this time. So similar to TLEDs, to be consistent with the solid state lighting program and those requirements that have been in place for quite a few years now, these products must meet the definitions, eligibility requirements, and supporting documentation requirements of the SSL testing and reporting requirements for screw-based replacements for HID lamps. So again, because these products are not intended for human lighting, they're intended for plants, the horticultural MOG LEDs do not need to meet the in-luminaire efficacy or light output requirements of the SSL program. So anything related to lumens, again, we're not concerned with. But an important difference from the solid state lighting requirements is that we are not requiring these lamps to be tested in a reference housings. We require that they just be omnidirectional, and that means that it emits radiation in all directions except the base direction. So similar to everything you've heard so far, these MOG LEDs need to meet all the version 2.0 requirements of the HORT program. And again, because there's no reference housing requirement, what must be tested is the bare lamp, which in this case means just the lamp itself screwed into the lamp holder. There's no ballast compatible products eligible. So it's just the lamp operated outside of a luminaire or retrofit kit. So testing just that bare lamp, the product must meet the version 2.0 technical requirements for the horticultural lighting program. Okay, on to the QPL listing. So for these types of lamps, there are 4 QPL listings that will be applicable in addition to everything else that's currently listed on the QPL. There's a product category field, so that will tell you whether it's a linear replacement lamp or a screw-based replacement lamp. It will designate the base type, so you know what you're working with. G13, G5, E39, or E40, depending on the lamp product. Also, product size information. So this depends on the category here. So linear replacement lamps, those TLEDs, must include the nominal length in inches. And then the screw-based replacement lamp, replacements for HID lamps must include the product dimensions as MOL, or maximum overall length, by width and height. Finally, the UL type will be listed for the TLEDs, right? So those options include type A, type B, AB, and C. But again, HID replacement lamps will be listed as type B as default because that is the only lamp product that's eligible for those mogul-based lamps. Okay, and as you've seen with the other 2 categories, we do have some key questions for all of you experts out there dealing with the efficacy of lamps or the proposed distribution requirements and lamp orientation. So please download the comment form and provide us with your input here. We very much appreciate answering these key questions and any other comments you may have on the version 2.1 technical requirements. Okay, so that sums it up for the proposed technical requirements for these new product categories. I'll go ahead and recap. So again, version 2.1 builds upon version 2.0. We are considering adding eligibility for DC powered fixtures, products with externally supplied active cooling capabilities, and LED lamp products. And again, version 2.0, those technical requirements will not be impacted by 2.1. We are just adding eligibility for these additional product types. And that means there's no delisting impacts from 2.1. Another way to say this is that if you have a product that doesn't fall into these 3 categories, you are fine staying at version 2.0 for the time being. There's no need to update to 2.1. But if you have one of these 3 types of products, you will be listed under version 2.1. Okay, this brings us to the question and answer session of the webinar. So give me a moment. I'm going to switch screens a little bit on my side of things. You'll just see this slide. I'm going to take a look at the questions that have come in, and assuming that there are some appropriate questions to be read out loud, I will do so, and Casey and I will answer them to the best of our ability. So hang tight. I'm just going to take a look at what questions have come in. Okay, I've got one that I will take. So the question is, do lamps include residential style products or more specifically medium screw base? And so the answer is those residential style, or, well, I should say just medium screw base, are not eligible at this time. We don't dictate the application in which the lamp is installed, but the current version or the current proposal only includes those pin-based and mogul-based lamps. But we do want to know if there is interest in these categories. So please include this in your comment form. Send it to comments@designlights.org. Okay, I'll continue looking through here. So this one relates to DC powered fixtures. Do you specify the required external cable length? Casey, can you give that one a shot?
Sorry about that, I was muted. So we do not specify an external cable length, and would be looking toward the manufacturer or the luminaire manufacturer to have a specified cable length. And if they don't, we have a key question for all of you guys about how we might be able to still consider and capture losses over what might be quite a lengthy cable in a DC setup. So make sure you give us feedback on that.
Great, okay. All right, how about this one? Also related to DC power. For the power testing on power supplies, what if the minimum load is above 50%? Will the 50% and 20% tests need to be conducted?
Yeah, so as proposed in version 2.1, the 50 and 20% test measurement points so that we can understand that efficiency profile or the curve for the power source would still need to be conducted and reported. If you have feedback on that and think that it should be something different, if a DC product is never going to be loaded below 50%, or some other number, let us know that, and we can make sure that we try to capture it in the draft 2 revision.
Okay, great. How about one on externally supplied actively cooled products? Are externally supplied forced air products eligible?
So as proposed,
and why? I know the basic answer, no, and why not, more specifically?
Yeah, so we're still investigating these. I haven't actually come across any in the market and haven't heard anyone requesting for them to be eligible, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be. So if you have some insight into that, I'm still investigating it, and I know if it's appropriate, we could include a proposed revision into the second draft. But generally, just not seeing them or hearing about them, but I'm aware of them as a type of active cooling, and just need to get more information around them before proposing a revision to include them.
Great, okay. I want to take a moment to just say that if you have a question, feel free to enter it at this time. We have just a couple left, and we have some time to answer questions. So if you do have questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat pane. So I'll keep reviewing for questions.
Oh, if you don't mind, Axel, I would just like to add a little bit more flavor onto the question you asked me earlier about the minimum load being 50% and needing to test below that still.
Yeah, please do.
All right, so as someone else has asked in the question pane, I saw about testing the driver at loads. Sorry, it says the question is how to create those loads for a driver if the driver can support testing 1 to 3 samples, but those samples don't align with any of these performance points like 20, 50, and max that we're asking for. So I think this little info kind of helps answer both of those questions. And so you don't actually need to test the DC power source with the fixtures or the samples themselves, and just some DC test load would need to be supplied. So it could be onto something that's not the fixture and makes achieving the 20% and 50% test points easier if they don't align with the sample load points.
Great. Okay. There's a general comment that I want to address, and it is something that we were thinking about. So the comment is, for LED replacement lamps, there's no driver spec or lifetime because it's integrated into the lamp itself. And so the question is kind of what will we do to considering those driver spec and lifetime requirements for horticultural LED replacement lamps. And this is a good point and something we're considering. And if you have any thoughts on that, please do enter it into a comment form, but we will be considering this with draft 2. So thank you. Casey, has any additional thought been given to the ppfd average standardization as a requirement?
Well, yes, that is, we're always looking at adding, new and useful information, whether that's reported information on the QPL or reporting requirements that show up in the technical policies. ppfd is definitely something, that people use and that we're aware of. And, some people like it better than the kind of PPID information that we're already showing on the QPL. So we're definitely considering this. It's not being proposed in version 2.1. But yeah, we're thinking about it. And if you want to reach out to us with any specific questions or comments or suggestions around how we might be able to include that in a future revision, I'm all ears.
Great. Okay. So it looks like all of the questions have been answered in the chat pane, and those that are relevant to the whole group, we've read aloud. We have a little bit of time, so I'll give you another opportunity to enter questions if you have them, and we can come back to it, but I'll take this time to give you a little more time with the Q&A. Just to wrap up the last couple slides I have. So I want to cover next steps with version 2.1. So we are currently in a 6-week comment period. So comments will be due right before Thanksgiving. That's November 20th. I think that's the Friday before the week of Thanksgiving. So we will take those comments, we will digest them and revise the draft as appropriate. And we expect draft 2 to be released in March 2021. That is the second draft, so it will come with an additional comment period, and then we'll again digest those comments and revise the draft. and we expect the final requirements in June 2021, effective the next month in early July. Okay. So again, I'll take a look back at the question pane in a moment, but just a thank you for attending the webinar, participating in the question and answer phase, filling out comment forms. Reminder that comments are due November 20th. Please send those completed comment forms to comments@designlights.org. And any other questions about applications that are in process or general inquiries, can send those to horticulture@designlights.org and we can route those to the appropriate person. So we're going to hang on the line and answer a few more questions here. I will take another look back at the question pane. So there's a question about double-ended HPS lamps, that they are a common type for horticulture. Why not included this lamp type in version 2.1? So that is definitely something we found. There are a lot of double-ended, and as the comment implies, our proposed category is just a single-ended screw-base lamp for those HID replacements. As far as we could find, there were no LED replacement lamps for double-ended products. But if you're aware of some, or if you are a manufacturer of some, please let us know. We'd be happy to take a look at those products. But because we are considering only solid-state lighting and LED with the horticultural program, we don't consider high-pressure sodium lamps, if that's what you're asking. So we are looking for LED replacement lamps. And so if those exist for double-ended applications, send us a spec sheet. Let us know what you're either considering or already have, and we will see how that fits into our program. Okay, just continuing to look through the questions, and there's still a couple minutes if you want to add some. Okay. Well, if you think of a question later on, again, you can send any other questions to horticulture@designlights, and we will get back to you. I think we're about to wrap it up. I don't see any more questions flowing in, so thank you very much for attending. I hope you have a good rest of the day and a good Halloween. Don't eat all the Halloween candy quite yet. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you.